Hello, everybody. My name's Chris, and I've recently developed a full-stack Rails application for a client. So I know the title's a bit misleading, the Rails and the client. What sort of client are we talking about? So I'm actually talking about a client, a person, and just a few lessons that I have learnt from this experience. A little bit about myself. I've been working in the web field for about 10 years, started off as PHP, and I have moved about 3-4 years ago, and the majority of my work is now in Ruby and particularly Rails. I'm self-taught. I've been programming since I was about 11 years old. I never went to uni to do any sort of course about programming. Stack Overflow is awesome. Built and launched 2 apps in the last 12 months, Practice It and briefit.com.au. And I'm doing some work with code for Australia at the moment. So, just an idea in the room, how many people have built a full stack Rails app by themselves, charged a client for their services? So not many. Who is looking to do this but is scared stiff? A couple, so not many, but that's all right. So one of the things I found was I was doing a lot of development on my own projects and a lot of sort of experimenting with gems and hacking things together. But when it came to the time of actually charging someone for what I was doing, my thought processes changed significantly. And I want to sort of run through some of those things with you today. The first part of any project and what I experienced was speaking with the client is the most important thing, and basically weighs into every decision that you'll make. And I know this sounds really obvious, but there are a couple of points here that I want to run through. In the beginning, don't talk about project specifics. And this leads into the next one, try and find out a lot about that person, about what they want to do, what they want to achieve. There are many things about a working relationship that don't involve, should this class definition actually be refactored into 3 other things? Like, that's not a part of solving problems for people. It's about interaction with the person. When I was speaking with this particular client, Jeremy Tompkins is his name. He's a lawyer by trade, and he wanted to build this web application, briefit.com.au. And he said, I want a platform that I can use so that clients can, like you and me, can post jobs about some legal problems that they need solving, and then lawyers can bid with proposals, and then we charge them a fee so that it's free for the clients. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but what are you wanting to achieve at the end of this? And I had to ask him a few times, but it eventually came out that he wanted to run it as a full-time business and he wanted to support his family. So that's really what the key driving factor behind the application was. Obviously it has to work, it has to function, it has to do what it's supposed to do. But it helps you significantly as a developer if you can understand what the underlying meaning or what the want of the client is past the application level. And explain the dynamics of the working relationship and expectations. So this is more about you. So if you're wanting a relaxed lifestyle and you don't want to be on call 24/7, you have to explain to the client what your timeframes are, how you work, what you expect them to give to you. A lot of these things are fairly straightforward, but for someone who's never done a web project before, especially a lawyer who's gone through law school and he's like, yes, I can create a web app on my own. These are some really important basic questions to get out of the way. So have a quick read of this. I'm sure everyone's heard stories of something like this happening. I've had something similar to this, except it was eBay, and the question basically saying, yeah, I'll pay you in equity of the project which according to me will be $800 billion in the next 6 months. So to combat sort of this gap in project expectations, you need to understand what your role is as soon as they've employed you. Now, if they come to you with an idea, which is what happened to me in this case, you are actually the architect of the business model. You become the person who is implementing not only the application, but the revenue stream, how the marketing is going to function, how the content's going to be updated. I mean, it's way past just implementing the business logic. And with that comes some sort of planning. So you'll have to sit down with your client and say, look, well, in the first 3 months, we're going to have to plan for this, and you're going to have to allocate a certain amount of dollars to achieve this in this time frame. You may need to employ some other people to do these services, etc., etc. When it comes to the app stage, give them as many possibilities as you can that you think you can achieve, because at the end of the day, they're the CEO, right, of their project, and they need to feel like they're making the decision and they're in control of what they're producing. This helps later down the track when when they say, oh, why don't we do it this way? It's like, well, we've already made that decision. In fact, you made that decision. So it becomes easier at that stage to grow with the client through the business process. Charge for your time accordingly. Consider equity arrangements if you can commit to the idea long term. So for this particular arrangement, I thought it was a good idea, and I discussed with the client, reducing my fee and time, still charging, but reducing the fee and time that he was happy with, and then taking a percentage share of the project when revenue stream was coming in. And that worked for him because, it was a startup. He didn't have a lot of money. So, this was a good way to go about that particular process. Now, do not lock into fixed pricing. This is something that I'd never done before, and I thought about it a lot before going into the project, and I said, look, all of the experience that you've had thus far about estimating timeframes, estimating your own skills, your own ability, put that into practice now. Put that on the line and actually bill the client for the hours that you spend on the project. Give them estimates for sure, but at the same time, the client will be more receptive to you and trust you as a developer if you're meeting your own estimations. And things change so quickly in the web world these days. So you don't want to be committing to a $30,000 or $40,000 project and realize 2 months or 3 months into it that it's going to cost $80,000, and then all of a sudden you've got nowhere to go. So you won't be happy, the client won't be happy. This arrangement of not locking into fixed pricing really helped me in this stage. Going into time. Very difficult to manage time with a client. If that's the only project that they're working on at the time, they will expect the world from you. They'll expect you to be on call 24/7. They'll want to ask you questions left, right and centre about every little thing, especially if it's new and they have no experience in the web at all. Goes back into charging for your time accordingly. But don't agree immediately and say yes to everything. That was one really big lesson that I learnt early on by saying yes. A good example was we were scoping the business model, and more so the application logic that would facilitate the business model. And this was about the clients, how the proposals would work, what the process is if there's a rejection, how many lawyers can propose to clients. And, I thought it would be relatively simple, create a couple of scaffolds in Rails, just put it together and then, customize a few things here and there. And, it's going to be sweet. I knew it would be hard, but I didn't think it was going to be that difficult. And I learnt fairly early on that you need to be realistic with your timeframes. I think a good rule is if you had to implement it yourself and do research to implement that solution, think about how long that would take, and that's a good guideline for how long it will actually take. And another thing which was really important in this project was allow time to think and plan on your own with no coding and no computer in front of you, maybe a pen and paper, and just thinking conceptually about how things can be put together, the solutions. Because being developers, you know, we love to fiddle, and I love to fiddle, and I love to sit in front of the computer and try things and change things. But your brain can work a million times faster than you can type. So sometimes it's good to just sit on your own and let those thoughts come flying into your head really quickly so that you can sort of visualize many different options instead of, or on a bigger picture rather than focusing on one or two things. Now, before I move into the next point, there's another little comic. This is sort of aimed towards designers, but it could well as be arranged to suit developers. So just pretend wherever it says designer, you mean developer, right? All good so far? So this is usually the first thing that happens in any project where that project is sort of someone's baby. They start sending through changes, and it gets interesting. I was really lucky. The person, Jeremy, who I dealt with in this project, is a really reasonable guy. And when you're dealing with reasonable people, you can discuss, you can iterate, you can determine. But this happens, and I've heard it happen, and I still hear it happen to far too many people. It gets worse. So once you have a few changes, then things seem to escalate. Because once you give control or the power of control to the client in decisions that they shouldn't be making, which is your responsibility. You know, you're the developer. It's your responsibility to guide the client through these choices. Once you've given away that control, it's very difficult to get back without causing arguments. Yes, I agree. Spider-Man undies to the park is a bad idea, especially if you've got no pants on. So you are no longer a web designer. You are now a mouse cursor inside a graphics program, which the client can control, email, and instant message. So that's not me. It may have been in a former life, maybe three to 5 years ago, you know, when you're just starting out and you have no idea. This is the result of not making those things. And how to combat that, I think, is education. And the good thing about education is that you begin to level the playing field between yourself and the client. So make executive decisions about functionality and design. You are the professional. And this is what I was saying before. So anytime there's a choice and the client says, I want something that's going to pop and be airy and fairy. I mean, they only really know how to talk in feelings because they have no formal training. And that may not be the case, but if it is the case, be aware to look out for those signals and then come back to them and say, based on my professional experience, this is the way I would implement these, is what you're talking about. The second point, your client is becoming the owner of an online business. So if the project that you're doing, the end goal of the client is to generate revenue, then you have to be aware that you have to inform them that this is not like designing a house, where you design the house and great, we've got the structure in place and we've got 3 bathrooms and 4 bedrooms, and you know, when it's built and it'll last for 20 years. It's not like that. A lot of clients expect that once they've completed a project, it will run by itself and there'll be no problems and they'll make millions of dollars and there's no issues. So you have to, at each stage of the process, you have to explain to them what's involved in deployment, what's involved in support. Do you have a marketing team? Do you have a support team? Very, very interesting to have that conversation with a client for the first time. Release and present iterations often with design implemented if possible. The reason I originally had that sentence without the hyphen afterwards, but I decided to put that because the client who knows nothing about coding can only rely on what they see. So if what you present them is a fully functional business model and everything works, but you're using Twitter Bootstrap as your design, then they will think that that's how it's going to be. The visualization process, unless you explain to them that, this is where we're going to take the app, this is only to determine how one page will move to another, those sorts of things, you need to make that crystal clear. I was doing a job recently with a sports organisation. They were trying to move some of their educational materials into iPad apps. So we went through that and wanted to get the content sorted out first. And their first email that came back was about yay long with every single design point that was terrible. And it's like, we haven't even gotten to that point yet, but it just illustrated the need to explain this to the clients. Often iterations. So the good thing about Ruby and Rails is that you can develop really quickly. You can punch out a whole bunch of application logic with front-end views and integrate it with some third-party services without too much trouble. You can probably integrate new features into an app within a week, 2 weeks, if you're just sort of throwing it together. This is great because clients love to see that things are possible, and when they know that it doesn't take too long, this gives them the confidence to trust you in the future development of that application. What are you presenting to them? Why? You will know, but the client has no idea. So, for example, the application logic, critical stage. The way I like to make apps is I will sit down and make sure that the internals of the application that are responsible for running the core business logic, i.e. generating revenue or generating the outcome, which in this case was revenue, they have to be in place before any additional design or optimization gets thought about, because the client needs to be happy with their business model. So my client didn't understand that process at the start. He's like, can't we work on the sign-up page first and get all of that sorted, and then move on to, then how the lawyers will post the briefs? And I'm like, well, that's okay, but the issue is these things are related. Like, what do you want to capture on the sign-up screen? Do you want to capture information about lawyers and clients? Do you want to get all of that profile information on their initial sign-up? I mean, there are a number of questions that arise that involve the entire thought of the application that you'll need to think about before implementing one thing at a time. So how does Ruby on Rails fit in? So I spoke about that a little bit already, in the fact that it's really quick. Quick to develop in, sorry. Quick overview of the application. These are just some of the features that I had to think about after he explained the idea to me. It's got a state machine, so this is responsible for managing the interactions between clients and lawyers and sort of the job approval process. It's got automated payments, so whenever a job is accepted, a lawyer has to be charged a set fee. Responsive design, so you want it to work on mobile platforms. User management, types and roles, so we had to think about 2 types of users, in fact 3 types, no, 4 types. So we've got the client, we've got the lawyer, we've got blog writers, and we've also got administration roles as well. Scheduled emails, so notifications within the application to send out to clients. It's got a built-in CMS and also document storage system also. So how did I achieve all of these things? Well, using gems. I mean, they are great, they're wonderful, we all know how useful they can be. However, when you use them on their own and you're fiddling with them in a new Rails install, everything works perfectly. You read the instructions, you go, this is the example, no problems, everything's hunky-dory. And all I can say is don't expect that to happen when you're integrating 5, 6, 10, 20, 25 gems into a single Rails application, especially when some of them rely on the functionality of the other gems. So read and experiment with multiple gems even before you're thinking about getting the project underway. Like, just test the upload feature and make sure that it's working in the third-party service provider that you want, so that, you know, if you're using Carrier Wave, it can upload to AWS or Google Drive or whatever. You just want to make sure that these things are happening and that those features are implemented. Don't assume anything about that at all. Another piece of good advice is to fork repos that you plan to use in a project. So fork them to your own GitHub account and manage them independently, because there's nothing worse than having a project up online and you do another release and it goes and downloads sort of an update that you weren't planning on doing. I mean, I know we have bundle install and it manages dependencies, but still we have to be really careful about what code is being changed and where, so that you're not getting any unnecessary headaches. Do not compromise the end result with a quick fix. You'll create more problems later on. So, for example, I had an issue with State Machine where I was trying to implement notifications directly into that State Machine. And the problem was the State Machine ran across a couple of different classes. It was running across the client class because there were actions on that every time something happened with a client, every time that something happened with a lawyer. There was also the individual jobs that were being posted. Things happened there, and I was trying to sort of solve this issue by, I don't know, just adding code anywhere that I could solve the problem. And we've all done this, you know, we're all guilty of that. But when you're dealing on a large, or working on a large project, just be aware that you want to solve these problems the best possible way that you can at the start, and it'll save a lot of trouble later. And then extract your own gems to maintain also. So this gets onto something a little bit later where, you know, the project may be in its later stages and you can extract some functionality and get other people to help you maintain that functionality. This relieves pressure from yourself and also improves the code for the client, which they are eternally grateful for. Deployment. Thinking about deployment. So when I originally started with Rails, I didn't deploy anything onto a server, I think, for about 8 months, 6 to 8 months. I was just fiddling on my dev machine, running local server, you know, just making sure that everything was working great. And then, you know, you do your first push to Heroku and, you know, everything breaks. And you have asset pipeline issues and lots of lovely things. So a few things about deployment. Continuous integration and test coverage. This is really, really helpful. More so when you've got other people working on the project. If you're working on your own, you know what's happening. You know what's happening in the code. You know what's happening with the features. There's, you know, if something goes wrong, you can find it really quickly. As soon as you start getting 4, 5 people onto a project, lots of commits going in, it's very hard to make sure that the next build doesn't destroy the entire application. So the continuous integration really helps. Hosting platform. So I spoke about Heroku just then. I realized pretty quickly with this app I needed a lot more than just Heroku as a service, and letting the client know this too, because it's like, okay, great, you're building a web application for me. Are there any ongoing fees? Yes, there are. What are they? I have no idea. You know, you have to send them the links to all of these services. Let them know. Let them sign up. Don't do this on their behalf. Get them involved in running the business. This is their part. This is their accounting. They should be giving you, you know, as long as you get the admin logins for all of this stuff, then you can manage it. But for example, I had to set up the Heroku, the Postgres service, a few Redis services. I had to manage the backups. Had to do the payment gateway through eWay, which I had to set up with him also. What else did we do? There was a few other things that we had to pay for. Google Drive. So he was really appreciative of the fact that I was showing him what was part of his business, and these are his expenses, you know, just like any other business would have an office space or electricity to pay for. I mean, these are the things that the client really needs to know about. And that sort of covers the next point as well. Ease of use for you. So I use Heroku, and I have done for a long time. The price is expensive, but I haven't invested any more time in other platforms. I have, but not to the point where I'm comfortable launching other people's livelihoods in these spaces. Once I invest a bit more time into that, then I will certainly, you know, do it at that point, but I'm not going to be using the client's money and time to try something new when it comes to deployment. You need something that it's easy for you to manage, you know what's going to happen, and you can fix things if they go wrong. And application monitoring, New Relic is the way to go. You will run into problems, lots of them. And just a couple of points on resolving problems. Give the client options. Okay, so you may be coding something that involves what's a good example? So I had an issue with CarrierWave, and it didn't support AWS uploads. I think it was either CarrierWave or something else. Can't remember. It was a while ago. Yeah, this project was a while ago. But at the time when I was doing it, it didn't support it. So I gave the client two options. I said, look, we can either go with Amazon or we can go with Google, or we can invest some more time in developing. I can quickly write a patch that will then allow for AWS uploads. And he was really happy with that. Like, a lot of the decisions, especially with resolving problems, come from fear from yourself. So you may be scared about what they're going to say, what they're going to do, what you're going to do. A lot of this is sort of projected forward into the future of, you know, a reality that hasn't happened yet. So giving the options to the client not only helps you think through the problem, but also creates a friendly environment to solve the problem with the client. Allow the client to make decisions when the roadblocks are reached. So ultimately, you want to leave it up to them. You don't want to be making any executive decisions that relate to business logic or how their app is going to function. Give them all the options and then let them choose, and then make sure that you're implementing that in the best possible way. Don't give ultimatums. So you don't want to go to a client, well, I've just spent 2 weeks developing the way that I think your business model should work. We can either do that, or I'll charge you another $5,000 for the next week's worth of work. That's a threat, in my opinion, and it leads to more arguments later down the track. You need to be really, really open when you're discussing business and dealing with other people's money. If you can't deliver on a particular solution, be honest. Honesty is the best policy. Always has been. You want to go to the client and say, look, I thought this was possible. I'm struggling. I can't do it. Maybe my skill set isn't where I thought it would be. We may need to bring in someone else. There is always another option. But don't be scared to talk to the client about that. They will always be understanding, because they are aware of what you are doing is something that is not a black and white situation. So, thanks very much. It's a bit of an overview of my lessons in learning things with the Brief It project, and I'm happy to answer any questions, if you have any. Yes. Yes.
How did you present to your client when there wasn't much visual
Excellent question. So the first release, just to repeat the question, how did I present to the client the base structure of the project when there wasn't much to see? And essentially, I took out all major design elements. I used Twitter Bootstrap because it was easy, and explained to him on numerous occasions, in every email correspondence, in every phone conversation, I said, this is to determine how your application is going to work and how people are going to use it. Keep in mind that this has nothing to do with how it will look in the end. We may have drop-down boxes. We may have gradients. We may have, I was using fairly basic terms, but that's how I did it. And he was very understanding of that. And most people are when you really break it down for them in a simple level. And then I think the realization of that part, or the second part to that, comes later in the process. Because if you really nail that application structure in the beginning, it saves you a lot of time. But only you know that from the beginning. So once you get down to the end of the project, the client may or may not have that realization where, you know what, everything that we have done up until this point has been done for a reason, and more often than not, the client does understand that. If not, you can sit down with them and say, now do you understand why we've done it in this way? And that really helps, especially when they come back 2 months later and ask for changes. So, yeah. Yes. Okay. So if I had my time again, one thing I didn't do, and one thing I wouldn't do again, and one thing I would do more of. More testing, 100% more testing. You can get carried away as a sole developer, just burning out code, making sure things work, when test-driven development is really important, especially for the core business logic. One thing that I wouldn't do. What wouldn't I do? I probably wouldn't do it on my own again. Like if I had to start this project again, and someone approached me, I purposefully did it by myself to try and experience not as much heartache, but as much of the problems that I could and learn from them, and also try and manage risk at the same time. So to avoid those problems before they happened, I wanted to see personally what I could do. But I think there's no benefit in taking sort of the hero's approach in this situation. There's so much to learn from other people, and if I was to do it again, I would definitely get other people on board and collaborate. And dealing with wonderful people such as yourselves, it's a good community here that we've got. So definitely to utilize that more. Yep. Absolutely. So would it just be developers, or would it be people in different fields? So definitely people in different fields, whether I was going to speak with them full time or not, really depends on the need of the project. So this guy came to me, he said, here's my idea, and that's all he had. So I really needed everybody. I needed a marketer, I needed a business developer, I needed a developer, I needed a designer, I needed so many more things that I can't even think of right now. But I would definitely say that looking, and even if I had all those people, I'd probably still look for more. Sorry, even if the idea wasn't an idea, say he came to me with a business plan, and say he came to me with a rough UI, about how he thought it was going to work, I think I'd still, now that I think about it, I'd still get other people on board to get opinions, because at the end of the day, we can only know so much, and we're not experts in every field. So we need to utilize, our friends and work colleagues in the best possible way. Oh.
Yeah, Fruiters has come, so if you would like to ask Chris any questions, you can fly him after the talk. But let's give a round of applause for...
Thank you.